Hey guys, this is the Beyond the Dojo podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Jeremiah.
It's always nice when you have private jokes right before the podcast starts so that you're laughing and you can't share what you're laughing at. And then our cat's in the background. Please stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
So it's been a little bit since we recorded an episode.
Yeah.
Been busy with the things of life.
Yeah. I think we're going to be able to get back onto the same regular schedule again. Tuesday mornings podcast thing.
Hopefully. We'll see.
Well, it's scheduled that way.
It is scheduled that way. It's been scheduled that way. So today's episode, we're actually answering a listener question. So last year, episode 28, was rules of dojo etiquette, where we actually came up with a list of rules related to dojo etiquette, things that we thought were important. And one of the comments, by the way, real quick, this is also an audio podcast. So we're on pretty much every podcast platform. And YouTube. So if you watch on YouTube, yay. If you prefer audio, we try to be as, not visual as possible so you can still listen and get the gist of it. We do look better on audio.
Just saying.
So I actually have to, pull my hair back and do stuff for YouTube. So anyway, so you can listen to us on pretty much any podcast platform. So anyway, on YouTube, somebody commented, trishalou.com. She said, "You both made me realize from this episode that a lot of people I train with do not show proper etiquette. Sometimes I come home so black and blue from simple blocks and counters from my partners. I personally try to focus on technique and control when others seem to just want to show how strong they are. Any advice for dealing with them?"
You're going to look at me.
Yeah, I'm just seeing if you want to answer. You want me to start?
Well...
First, let's say we can empathize.
Yeah.
Because I think most dojos have at least a few of those.
Right.
And just to kind of give a globalist answer from the perspective of a sensei, it's important for the sensei of a dojo to set the culture as to whether or not that type of behavior is okay. Unfortunately, if you're in a dojo where it's considered a good trait to be exceptionally strong and to give people bruises, then you're kind of, I don't want to say you're fighting a losing battle, but you're going to always be dealing with that.
You're going to be the victim of a culture.
Yes. And I love the dojo that I grew up in, but in a lot of ways, it was kind of like that, even though the instructor would kind of get onto people for bashing, but because there wasn't a lot of focus on technique, that's kind of what ended up happening, was people did get bashed up. And people who were the bashers were often not corrected in a way that was effective, I think. Like I said, the instructor would say that with words that he didn't want that to happen, but I don't think he understood how to bridge that gap and help it to stop happening.
Right. For me, being a big American, gaijin in Japan, training with kids half my size, the sensei basically beat it out of me. Anytime I overdid any kind of physical contact during 5-step or 3-step Kihon Kumite, he would come over and shinai me. He would basically hit me on top of the head with the shinai and be like, no. And at the time, I thought it was unfair because, these kids were swinging as hard as they could to block my punches and stuff, but just the size difference alone made it obviously where they had to. They felt like they had to do that. For me, the other hand, it was the whole lesson of subtlety and control. Long term, he did me a great favor because I was able to control my blocks and understand that, blocks aren't supposed to hurt.
Right.
Either the puncher or you. So. And
two, there are karate styles where your blocks are supposed to hurt.
Right. But for shotokankaratehumanperformance, JK approach, it's all about deflection.
Yeah.
And if you get into kumite, you're not going to bash people. Not nowadays. You're not going to bash your blocks. If you do that, you'll get caught with a really quick counter. You're too committed to one thing or another. So.
Well, who was it that was able to break baseball bats with his shins and break people's legs with his arms? Was that Inoue?
No. Uekiru? Uekiru is known for that, where they kind of just kick through the bats. Kyokushinkai is known for that, where they kick through things like that. And that's part of their training, but it's not what they emphasize.
Right.
The problem what people see is that's all they see in the videos.
Yeah. Sorry, cat.
Our cat's about to unplug the light. And they think that's what it's about. And Kyokushinkai is a pretty rough, tough, karate where it's full contact. And but if you watch some of their videos or you talk to people, there's subtleties to even what they do. There's body rotation in there to kind of deflect those things. It's a misconception sometimes, depending on how you see martial arts and what what you want out of martial arts.
Right.
If you're insecure and you want to be a big bad, kick everybody's butt, rough and tumble, that's what your karate is going to be. It's going to be what you are trying not to be or trying to fight against. In a sense, like for me, I was always big, and my dad called me a bull in the china closet. That was like his favorite thing to say because I was just big and clumsy. And my family and my Japanese side of the family and a lot of the Japanese kids I went with called me Debu Debu-chan, which is like fat boy, basically fat kid. And that's just what they did over there. So I was always had that impression that I wanted to be more subtle with my technique, and that kind of directed where I went with my karate.
Right.
Now, by no means does that mean I'm not ineffective. What I do is very effective. It's not brute force.
That's interesting because I think that there are, I'm a very small person, and
Right.
I've always been viewed as a small person, and that leads to a whole other host of issues, which I want to talk about in a little bit. But there are people who are my size, who, because they are my size, they
Right.
want to be excessively strong, and they want to bash their way around and essentially beat on people, even though you would expect that kind of thing from a larger person because they are stronger and they may not necessarily be trying to hurt someone, but you would expect that from a larger person, but not from a smaller. And I think sometimes smaller people, including women, will, I don't know if they get complex necessarily, but they essentially want to show that they're strong, and they will bash on people as well. So I think it's kind of the same thing with smaller people, just the opposite.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it depends on why you come into karate and what your intentions are, and the culture of the dojo.
Yeah, definitely.
The culture of the dojo in Japan was not brute force because these kids are 60, 70 pounds each, and they're just not going to create that. So it was really focused on timing and technique. While, you go to the Western world or the Western, Europe and America, you're naturally bigger, you're naturally stronger, so you're going to gravitate towards what your strength is. That, to me, was understandable back in the 70s and 80s, where there was a lot of still, the idea that the Japanese knew it all, and the Westerners couldn't understand it, in a sense, or Asians overall in martial arts had this leg up. But nowadays, you have qualified instructors and karateka that spend a majority of their lives doing things to fine tune that, and it's the emphasis is no longer on this brutality, and we should accept that part of our martial arts.
Right. Well, and I think there's also, I feel it is a massive misunderstanding when it comes to Shotokan, at least, maybe in, I'm sure, other styles too. How much energy and effort are you wasting on a block that you have to focus your energy into that block and actually attack that person's limb? Now, if you're using a block to attack a limb, I feel like that's different. That's a different thing because you're intentionally trying to attack the limb, trying to incapacitate it. You're trying to maybe do a joint lock, or you're just literally trying to hurt their arm for the sake of stopping them from attacking you. I do get that. I feel like that's a little bit of a different perspective. I do think also that if you are doing that in class, you need to take precautions, because if you're trying to actually injure someone, this is why we do the whole control thing in Shotokan, is we're trying to maximize speed and power and impact. So we're not going to hit our target. We're not going to hit the person in front of us every time. Instead, we're going to have a little bit of space there so that we can maximize our output and not pull back, and also not put somebody in the hospital all the time. Right. Well, if you're trying to actually practice impact on their limbs because you feel like that it's a technique that's going to be effective in a real fight, why wouldn't you have some kind of protection for that? Now, that can go back to the whole, one of the criticisms we have of more commercialized karate and taekwondo and things like that is they wear way too much protective gear. Okay, because it makes them extremely
they're confident over their control,
right.
So they just feel like they can kick through the pads and it won't hurt
Exactly, and they just bash. So I feel like that's a different thing. But if you were intentionally training a technique, like, hey, I'm going to actually train this block to knock the living shit out of your arm, I feel like that's a whole different ball game.
And I also feel like it's different if there's willing partners.
Yes, that's different too, because they're expecting it too.
Right. It's like it's mutual, because they're expecting it, but you also know you're going to get it too.
Right.
Like, you know that's going to happen, so you're cool with it. Right. It's when someone decides to up the ante and not really have that discussion beforehand. You know.
Right.
Like, there's a couple guys in the dojo now. I could look at, Terry and be like, and smile at him and kind of nod and have that silly kid, that childish grin.
Right.
And it's all good, because we know we're going to pick up the speed, we're going to hit harder, and there's going to be these times where we're just going to smack each other. Acceptable, because both of us are accepting that kind of parameter, right? But it's like, it's when you decide to do that without having any kind of nonverbal or verbal communication, where you're letting them know this is what's going on, So I don't think we're saying that hard training and hard blocking is always bad. It's just bad when you're the only one doing it.
Only one being blocked that way?
Only one that in the partner work, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You're the only partner of the two that are decided that I'm going to block hard and I'm going to punch hard, when the other person, obviously, it might be still trying to get the combination or the subject at hand. You know what I'm saying? It's like... And
it goes back to what you said earlier. If one person is doing that, and it's obviously not the drill, it would appear that that's a major ego issue. Yeah, I don't know if there's really any way around that. And if you're listening to this and you're that person and you don't like that,
sorry,
check yourself. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. But if it's not the drill, and you're obviously dealing with someone who is weaker than you, regardless of male, female, young, old, or indifferent,
right?
If the person is weaker than you, you should be taking that into account. But then, if there's a specific purpose for the drill and you're making it about you and about you showing off, that's an ego thing. Right. Whether you like it or not.
Right. It comes even to play with not even the physicality, but the knowledge and understanding of karate also. If you're a fifth kyu and you're training with a eighth kyu, then it's your responsibility to kind of meet them where they're at, to help them out. And people are like, well, then I don't get to train. And that's crap. Being able to control the speed, strength, and power of your techniques while working with a smaller person, and be able to amp it up with someone that's higher rank or bigger or faster, is what uniquely karate in my approach, in my view, especially the JK approach. If you watch some of the videos on YouTube where they're just videoing a local dojo, a local JK dojo, and you can see that sometimes you can see there's this difference of like the same black belt going to different ranks, and he's changing his speed, his aggressiveness to match these people, because what you're trying to do is uplift each other. And only thing you're doing when you bash and dominate like that is you're literally lowering not only the dojo culture but yourself, because everybody views you as that person,
and they don't want to train with you.
That, or they just know that when they train with you, they're gonna hit you. They're not gonna have control. They're just gonna go at you as hard as they can, because you already established that approach.
I have to say that I do often enjoy training with lower ranks, with smaller people, because I am a smaller person and I'm always training with bigger people of about equal or higher rank. So it's nice, actually, as a change, to train with smaller people, not just for the sake of control, but if there's technical stuff that I'm working on, it's nice to have someone who is ignorant enough that they're basically compliant, or sort of compliant, they don't know what's coming, so they're kind of falling all over the place. But it's a nice way to practice those things on a smaller person and see how it can work. That's not to say that you don't do what the drill is. When we're doing partner work, I'm obviously doing the drill, but I think as an advanced rank, you have the freedom, if there's the time, to add in a couple of extra counters, or maybe change your distancing or positioning to the other person, as long as the drill allows it. So whatever is allowed by the parameters of the drill, being able to make that slightly more advanced, and being able to practice control, go slowly, and do it on a partner who is, not the same size or rank as you, or larger or bigger or higher, I feel like there's a huge advantage to that. So I don't really get why people would feel like they have to beat up on smaller people anyway. Like, use it to your advantage.
Again, it goes to ego, pecking order.
Yeah.
Building yourself up to be this unstoppable machine. And, to me, there's only a few ways to handle that. You handle it yourself in the sense that you don't allow that bashing to affect you, and you constantly and effectively show them that proper technique and the subtleties of karate is more effective than strength.
Yeah.
Simply put.
I'm just saying, I enjoy training with smaller ranks too because I get to throw them. And I'm not hurting them, and they enjoy it, and they get to learn something from it. So
it's
maybe
fun,
you also,
right?
as the person who is the could-be basher, or the more advanced person, or the person who thinks that you're stronger, or maybe you are, maybe you could use that for other things if the person is of a lower rank. So we're going to assume here that maybe it's a higher rank versus a lower rank. That's not always the case.
No, it's not always the case.
As a matter of fact, it's often not the case.
Well,
but,
Well, yeah, because there's some people that just have that attitude. Or, there's this whole urban, a general understanding that brown belt is a level that you generally run into that. Because it's focused. Your karate's focused on strength, power, and speed.
Got to prove yourself.
And you got to prove yourself because you're constantly under the microscope getting broken down. So there's a feeling of, I have to make sure they understand. And honestly, if you're training with a brown belt, you should just expect that a little bit. You should, because that's where their training is. And I will give that level, those ranks, a little bit of more leeway. Just be like, and if it's really bad to where you're getting bruised, you should look and be like, bro,
yeah,
come on, man.
So,
and just kind of give them that come on thing. If they don't loosen up, then good for you, good for me.
Yeah.
That's just how I see it. But if it's systematic, where it's constantly you're dealing with these people and it's the same person or this and that, I generally, as a sensei, handle it myself. I'm constantly watching the students interacting and training with each other, and there's people in our dojo that I could go, okay, they're going to push their weight around, right? And I won't say much. I'll remind them. I'll keep coaching them. Hey, chill. It's not strong. It's not speed or power. Just kind of do this. Relax. Mutually kind of lift each other up. And you say it over and over until you just realize they're not listening. Right? And then you take your opportunities and you say, okay, I know with my size and my strength that I'm basically going to be one of the strongest people in the dojo.
Sure.
So I just throw my weight around them.
Yeah. So they realize what they're doing.
Right. Because they try to block me. If you train long enough, there's certain things you could do to make it extremely hard for a basher to be effective. If you time it just right and you contract just right and you know which way the block is going.
Throw your elbow out a little bit.
Just
kidding.
Being able to connect to the ground and really brace in the direction of the block. So if it's outside forward block, it's crawling across your body.
Makes me cringe just thinking about it.
You just kind of you flex into it a little bit, and so what? It might give me a little bit of a bruise or irritate me, but it's nothing new for me, and it's a lesson that has to be taught.
And it's from the perspective of a sensei who's trying to correct the students who are doing that and causing the issue.
That's the focus. It should be a sensei to the student. And because by that point, if the sensei's involved, the students that are working with each other should have been trying to work through it.
Right.
In a sense. That's why we encourage that first. Hey, have a communication. Look at each other. Communicate what's going on. Higher ranks should have these responsibilities. Lower ranks should respect these things. And if that doesn't work, the sensei should be in tune enough to your dojo and the community and the culture of it to know when someone's outside the acceptable parameters. Right. And then they should step in, and not step in the sense of step in and just beat the crap out of them. It's not that, because then what you're saying is that's how you establish dominance.
That's
not what you want. What you want to do is establish dominance without them knowing anybody else really knowing your established dominance.
Well, it's more of like, you can't push me around type of thing. Not like, I'm going to beat you up.
Yeah, it's like you could try that all day long, but it's not going to work against me.
Right.
Right? And then showing the difference. So as your attacker, you're bracing against those things and you kind of teach them the lesson there. But when they come in, you're very subtle in your technique and your timing is correct, and you deflect. It's where they kind of, not in the sense of you're throwing them around, but your technique is so well done that they lose their balance.
Right.
They lose their control.
Right.
And you throw them around effortlessly. Because for me, that was where most of the connection or the understanding of like, you don't have to be hard. You don't have to block hard. The subtleties and movement is where it's going to be effective. And that's how I try to handle it as best as possible. Now, there's been times where it had to go further than that, and we'd have to slow spar. Now, slow sparring is not the same as full sparring. Slow sparring is all about strategy, distance, timing, and stuff like that. So there's no idea that I sneak a punch in to get that point, because there's no point to be gained.
Right.
But slow sparring with a sensei to a student can teach that student so many things that they can't deny. They just cannot deny it. And that's kind of where, as a sensei, it's your responsibility to hammer the nail down.
Right.
The nail that sticks up doesn't generally mean that you're a bad person. It means that you're outside the normal accepted behavior within the dojo.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you have to be put down. It means that you have to be taught to understand that you're outside the normal accepted behavior. And to me, that's how I do it.
Yeah.
But I have the benefit of being a larger, stronger male.
Right. And from the perspective of a smaller female, it is a little bit of a different approach, because I'm not going to be able to withstand, like if we have a adult male who is doing this kind of thing, I as a sensei, I'm not going to be able to withstand all of that. So the perspective that I will generally take is, number one, just talking about it openly in front of the entire class, or specifically to that person, and being like, hey, what you're doing is not only not what I am asking, and not only is it incorrect and going to be cause issues for you and the person that you're working with, but it's also really freaking disrespectful. Not only to me as your instructor, because you're not doing what I'm asking, but also to the person that you're working with. And I kind of have to take that approach to it. Yeah. Or if I am in the mix, it's kind of the same thing, but it's going to be a more one-on-one conversation. And you know what, too? As the person who's receiving, this is going to kind of veer off into as the student rather than as the teacher, but as a teacher also, don't have so much of an ego that, like, if you're a smaller person and it's a larger person bashing, even if you're not the sensei, you're at a seminar or something, don't have so much of an ego that you can't say, hey, you're hurting me, because they are hurting you. I mean, that's kind of part of the point here, is like, we're not trying to like hurt each other. We're trying to just train. There's a time and a place for hurting each other or attempting to inflict pain. Right now is not the time. So I think to also, not only should their ego be in check because they shouldn't be acting that way, you have to also check yourself and be like, hey, you know what? I need you to know that what you're doing is hurting me. I'm going to put this out there so that you understand that. So maybe you'll kind of check yourself and realize, hey, you know what? I really am taking this overboard. Right. I feel like even as the instructor, you should have the humility to do that.
Right. And if you have the ability to avoid that person while training, then do that.
As the student, yeah.
As a student, do that. Just, all right, everybody's done it. You lined up pairs, you're shoulder to shoulder. You kind of look down the line to see who you're going to get. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you just switch places one spot, you'll miss them. Mm-hmm. And that's fine.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about this some more from a student's perspective, because we've talked a lot about it from a sensei's perspective. So Jeremiah already pretty much touched on it. As a student, the best thing that you can do is address it directly. So if a person, like I already said, if a person's hurting you, telling them up front, hey, you're hurting me, can we not do that? That's one thing to say. Even
if you word it as like, yeah, that's a bit much, man. Let me kind of figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be like vulnerable in the sense of, oh, you're hurting me, because then guys that are that kind of way, or girls or females are that way, it's a building up their ego.
Yeah, but it's
like, some of them will get kind of like, yeah, and do it even more, and it's like, bro,
I don't know that they would do it even more, and it's not your responsibility necessarily as a student to check a person's ego. It's our responsibility as the sensei.
Right.
But as a student, it's more a responsibility to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess it could go either way. I don't really foresee someone, if you tell them like, hey, you're hurting me, can you not do that quite like that? I feel like most people would be considerate and they would listen. But addressing it directly is really important. You know, being able to tell someone right off the rip if it's something that's like that's hurting you, or you just know from past experience that they're hurting you, then you need to tell them up front, like, hey, you know what, you really bruised up my arms last time. Could you be a little bit softer, because I want to be able to work on this drill, or taking the perspective off of that so much and especially if they're like your kohai, like so they're about equal rank as you, or maybe if they're a lower rank than you. I dealt with this when I was coming up in ranks also, is being able to make those small corrections, not from the perspective of a sensei, but being like, hey, this is the drill that we were assigned to do. How about we focus on doing this thing? And people are not going to like to hear that, but that's another way of addressing it directly.
Yeah.
So because I'm smaller, I'm beginning to notice this pattern that people think it's okay to put their hands on me and to try to hurt me or dominate me or push me around, whether emotionally or physically or whatever. It's become apparent this year now more than ever. So I feel like bullies are probably something I'm going to have to deal with my entire life. I've had a situation happen recently where someone put their hands on me, and essentially what it turned into was removing myself from the physical contact and telling the person directly, you cannot do this. It is not okay with me for you to put your hands on me. You shouldn't put your hands on anyone. In the sense of being in the dojo, if that's what you feel is happening and they're deliberately bullying you, I think in most cases they're not thinking about it. But if they are doing it deliberately, you definitely have to address it directly and be like, hey, this is a boundary that you are crossing and this is not okay. I came here to train. You're causing an issue for me. And you know what? I think some people would look at students like that and they would be like, well, you're high maintenance and you need to learn how to deal with it. Okay, I think there's a time and place to learn how to deal with certain situations, and I do think sometimes you should put your head down and learn to deal with bullies. I do think you should do that. You should have to function in an environment where there are bullies, because you have to learn how to be emotionally intelligent enough to navigate around them and not let them push your boundaries. But if it's too much, you address it directly, and you got to tell your sensei.
Yeah, there has to be open communication, not only with the kohai, but with the sensei also. Because if the sensei interprets the situation to where it's like mutual aggression, mutual training, then he's not going to really do anything, or she's not going to do anything. But if you say, hey, this is not what I'm asking for, I'm trying to do, then there's an obligation there by the sensei to make sure that all students are training in safety.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It's the sensei's responsibility to make sure that his students or her students have a safe place to train. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean only in the building and how it's built, or the dojo, how it's set up. It's the community also. It's the other students you have to worry about. And I'm still on this, like, for me, because of the way I've experienced physical interaction, it is truly up to the sensei, because he sets forward the culture of the dojo. Mm-hmm. He basically, by his nonverbal actions, establishes what's accepted and what's not. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think too, we're talking about dojo culture, and I know we talk about that like pretty much all the time on this podcast. It's your responsibility as an instructor to establish what the culture is, and you should also have a vision for how your students are training, and what is allowable and what is not allowable. You should need to have some things that you stand for and things that you stand deliberately against. And I know that it's hard running a dojo because it's a business. You don't really want to turn people away. And we've experienced that, and it's not fun. So, I get that it's stressful to call people out because you don't want to lose business. You don't want to lose students. You appreciate certain people. You want them to be in your dojo. But is it worth it for you as an instructor to have people in your dojo who are like that? Like this is worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is you have someone in your dojo who's a bully to your other students, whether verbally or physically in partner work or whatever, and you call them out about it in a way that is respectful, doing your due diligence as the instructor, but then they choose to leave because they're offended. That's the worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario, unless
that's best case scenario.
Try to attack you or something. Well, worst case scenario as a business owner and as a sensei, that's the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. Is it worth it in that case then? Is it worth it if they leave?
Absolutely.
I think yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We think yes. You have to decide that for yourself. But, what happens long term if you let that crap go?
Right.
You're literally letting that infect your dojo.
Yeah, it's going to diminish your dojo culture. It's going to diminish the community. And eventually what ends up happening is you'll have a bunch of people just like that person.
Exactly.
Or you'll have nobody.
Because nobody wants to be part of your dojo. And
that's not That's not smart.
So long before I started training, that was one of the phases that our dojo went through. It was so hard, and kids beat up on each other so bad that people would come to the dojo for a day and they were thrown into sparring almost immediately, and they would not come back. And there are hundreds of students that have had this happen, where they came to the dojo and the culture was literally almost like a bully fighting culture, and they didn't want to be. This is what I have been told, because I wasn't there. And they would leave and they wouldn't come back.
Right.
In the long run, that wasn't worth it, because that, in a lot of ways, killed a lot of the growth that dojo could have had. And
we still deal with it to even today when we have new students. If their parents had trained with the old dojo, we have to explain to them, we're not the same. We don't have the same approach. We don't do that. It's a different dojo. And, they're skeptical. Like, you can see it in their eyes. And they don't want to leave their children alone. But they're, you know what I mean? But after a couple of classes, they realize it is completely different. And we're not about that. And it becomes okay.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, like, we're not saying you should just be soft and fluffy and you shouldn't try hard. That is not the same as a person being a bully, not doing the techniques correctly, and intentionally hurting other people. That's totally different. And if you don't know the difference, you need to probably train a little bit longer and watch more people, and eventually through observation, you'll see the difference.
Right. There's going to be physical contact, and there's going to be mistakes made. And like you said, you should know the difference between a mistake and intentional harming. That's something that your gut has to know. You have to know just by the way the person does it. And,
last thing, once again, to reiterate, they may not be aware that they're doing it.
Right.
They honestly may think that that's normal, and they may be completely unaware. And you're getting frustrated as a student. You're getting pent up anger because that person is hurting you, and they have no idea. Right. And they don't have any kind of emotional anything. They don't have any malice towards you. Right. They just literally don't know. I don't know if that's the case in your case.
Some of these guys that do manual labor for a living, they don't understand how strong they actually are. Yes. They might not look like they're built, but they've worked with their hands all their lives, and that's just how they move. Mm-hmm. And it takes a little bit of coaching to be like, hey, you got to relax a little bit, man. That's kind of rough.
Right.
We're not hammering a nail through the guy's arm here. We're doing these other things. And, as a dojo, I think we imply enough of a circular kind of blocking and ideas in our teaching that they understand that it's not always best to be bashing or having these hard impacts. Mm-hmm. So,
from the perspective of a student, I know that I feel like this has happened a few times where students will listen to our podcast and they'll see how we run our dojo. And as a student, maybe they agree with some things that we say, but their dojo is not the same way. And, you have to tread cautiously, and we choose not to tread cautiously because this is our podcast and we can say whatever we want. We run our own dojo. How we run it, we just share it so that people can learn. Right. If you're a sensei and you're listening, maybe you agree with what we are saying and you'll implement some of those things. But as a student, it's difficult because if you agree with what we're saying, then what we're saying is an ideal for you, but your dojo is not necessarily operating in that way. And as a student, I do think you can affect the culture of your dojo. I do think that, but you just don't have as much influence as the sensei. And please don't allow, if your sensei is someone who likes bashing and who is totally into that stuff, I would encourage you not to allow yourself to build up resentment against them for that reason. I am not calling them ignorant, but that's the way that they have chosen to run their dojo. That's maybe a conscious decision or unconscious decision that they have made. It's just where they are. Right. So unfortunately, you have to be accepting of people where they are and instead focus on what you want your karate to be. You don't always have as much say over that when you're a Q rank as far as like how you actually train and what your technical ability looks like. But your attitude, your spirit, the way you interact with other people, I feel like in a lot of ways you can control those things. Yeah. So, if you can take that part to heart and then try to protect yourself in the process and be open with communication, then I think you'll be okay, but don't get mad at your sensei because he doesn't think the way that we do.
Yeah.
Not everyone's
or
going to
is
think the same.
unwilling to change anything like that, because that's their right. It's their dojo. It's their right to do that.
Yeah.
But it's also your right as a human being to be engaged in it or not. Mm-hmm. And if the culture doesn't change and you're tired of getting beat up, then go somewhere else.
Well, not everyone has that luxury.
Yes.
Yeah. I
agree with you. Then then I hate to say it, it might be best for you not to be participating in karate.
If it's a really bullying
dojo,
yeah.
If that's how you feel and that's the trauma that's created, that doing karate or martial arts is creating, then it's not worth it. Honestly.
Yeah.
Step away. Do something else. Go figure out another hobby or another art you want to be passionate about. But don't remain in a toxic situation because you feel like it's you that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because a lot of times people go, man, I don't get it. Everybody else is okay with it, but I'm not okay with it. Well, it's not your concern that everybody else is okay with it. You should concern yourself with yourself.
If it's an environment that's not ideal and you can deal with it, then that's one thing. If it's abusive and no one's going to change and you're obviously like not better for being there, absolutely. Yeah. You might just have to step away. Yeah, and that sucks. But unfortunately, that's just the case with some people. It's not karate's fault. Right. It's just people. You know, karate has people in it. So that means that people are going to taint it. So, yeah.
Exactly.
So our heart goes out to you if
you're
dealing with that.
Yeah, if you're dealing with that, because it does happen more than we'd love to accept. Accept. It is a common thing.
And sometimes it's temporary too. Sometimes one person just gets their ego on a trip and then they do it one time, they never do it again. Could be one of those situations. But if it's one person, open communication is the best that we can offer. It's the best advice that we can give because we can't change the person. We can't come there and beat them up for you, unfortunately. Yeah.
So that
could be a nice service.
A little bit of a story about that. My mom and my dad was stationed in Japan, and I got my shodan in Japan, and then we got transferred into upstate New York. And for the first 6 weeks, 6 months of me training there, I was on my back more than I was on my feet. They would literally, all the black belts would take the opportunity and sweep a 13-year-old kid, as these guys are 25, 30, 35 college students, full-grown men that worked in construction all their lives. And at first, I honestly thought it was they weren't accepting of my rank because I didn't get it through that dojo. They didn't allow students to get shodan rank until 16. So I broke that rule. So there was a little bit of that issue.
Yeah.
But honestly, what happened after those about 6 months there, I come to realize they weren't maliciously hurting me. They were teaching me something that they, as a dojo, really enjoyed doing, and that was sweeps. That was the thing they loved doing. Everyone in that dojo could sweep somebody. And that's how they knew how to teach it, was to sweep. You had to get swept, right?
Just to get the young kids and sweep them.
Right? At first, I didn't realize they were catching me and keeping my head from bouncing off the floor. You know what I mean? They would sweep me, and they had my gi, and they'd sweep me, and they'd look at me like they're about to knock me silly, but my head never hit the floor.
Right.
It was one of these, it was also in the 80s, so it was a little different, in eearly 90s, so it's still a little different with the culture. It was definitely rougher back then. But it took me 6 months to realize they weren't trying to hurt me. They weren't trying to beat me down. They were teaching me something that, in the way they were taught. And yeah, did the lessons suck? Absolutely. But at the same time, I'm grateful for it because I'm a pretty decent sweeper. I understand what they did through the experiences. And I also understand that they did it in a tough love situation, because although they had me in the air and they slacked the crap out of my foot and my leg, they didn't allow me to get hurt. They didn't allow me to injure myself or knock myself out silly. So what I'm saying that for is definitely evaluate the situation.
Yeah.
Before you consider it being one way or the other, even if because it might be physically tougher.
Right.
You definitely want to make sure that what you're interpreting or internalizing what's going on is exactly what's going on.
Right. So
that's the hard part when it comes to some of these dojos that like to train hard is that the way they teach is pretty tough and rumble. It's rough on you, but it's effective in a sense.
Right.
You know, if you're willing to learn.
Yep.
Now, it's also a way for a dojo to eliminate those that they don't feel like are going to be
tough enough.
Well, yeah, they don't fit in the culture. But definitely you want to make sure that what's happening to you and what you're internalizing to happen is actually happening.
Right.
That you definitely, there's no doubt in the world that this guy is trying to block through your arm, not block your arm.
Yeah.
You know, with the intention. You can tell. I mean, if you have any experience with any life experience or wisdom, you can tell when someone wants to hurt you and when someone's just training hard and trying to get something down and they don't realize what they're doing to you.
Yeah. And you know, okay, so here's the other thing. If a person is blocking you hard and you're getting pain in your arms and stuff, or your arms are getting bruised, some people have a lower tolerance for pain than others. So some people, like, you're not always going to be able to help it. You're probably going to get bruised in some capacity. Just to put that out there. We probably should have said that at the beginning. But I've always pretty much get bruises from doing partner work. It kind of happens. In an ideal situation, you wouldn't. But is it restricting you from using your arms? Is it something that's really significant where it's a major issue? You know, even if you don't interpret what the person is doing and you don't try to look at it from the perspective of, are they actually trying to harm me? If the physical action caused you enough discomfort to where it's like you can't really function properly or you're in a lot of pain, you don't really have to address the person's intention. You can just be like, hey, you know what? Last time we trained, my arms were pretty beat up. Could you just be softer this time? That's it. You just don't have to even like address their intention. If you feel like it is being a bully, then that's different. But you know, if that's all that it is.
I feel like that's a great way to understand what their intention is.
That is a great way to understand it.
Because
Yeah.
you're like, hey man, you beat me up a little bit last time. Can you kind of chill? And if they're like, oh man, my bad. You know, I didn't mean to. And they honestly can genuinely see that they're trying not to. Then you know it was just them doing their thing, not paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
But if they're like, huh, or they're like sorry and have that attitude, and they go on and still do it again,
yeah,
then you know they mean to do that, and there's no excuse for that.
Yeah, or it's not about you; it's about them.
Right. It's all well.
They're gonna train the way that they want to train, regardless of how it affects you. So.
Right.
Maybe. A lot of facets to consider here. I know that we have pretty much talked in circles this whole time.
There's a lot of circle talking, but at the same time, it's a subject that kind of has a lot of there's a lot of things that are interrelated for you to kind of deal with, and karate is physical. Karate is violent, and sometimes it is, you are kicking and punching each other, and there's a stage where you have to understand that a kick is a kick and a punch is a punch. There's nothing more to it. There's no emotional attachment to it.
Yep.
And that's part of it too, you know, but it's not an excuse.
Right.
It's not an excuse for someone to go excessively over that. But that definitely, in my opinion, the regulation of bullies and physical contact is definitely the sensei's responsibility. He or she should be attuned enough to everybody doing work that they understand, and he could step in and be like, yo, you need to chill a little bit. You know, look at this. You know, some people literally have to say, look, the size of your arm. It's the size of this person's leg. You need to calm down a little. You know? Yeah. So it's just part of that. The other thing is, and it happens in our dojo sometimes, and it irritates me, is sometimes people will do it playfully.
Okay.
I think it's kind of silly, you know.
Funny to hurt each other.
Well, especially with pad work, you know, there's a couple guys that like to just slam into the pad, and you know, in our class, there's teens and adults in this certain class, and it's kind of funny, or they think it's funny to hit the pad hard, and the person slides back 3 feet. The problem with that is the jar of the impact is still harmful.
It is very harmful. I'm just going to say that from a small person's perspective, you get major whiplash.
I mean, it's no different than getting trucked on the football field. There's no difference there, and you have to kind of regulate that also. And the way I do is I just take the one person that's been kicking the pad really hard, and I put them with the biggest person we have.
And then you get to hold the pad.
And I make sure clearly that the other person knows exactly what their responsibility is. Yeah. And that's to smack the bejesus out of that pad, because that's what has been established already.
Right.
that rule, good for you, good for me, is key to self-regulation.
Yeah.
Because when things go down and that bully feels like they've been hurt, I just tell them, I've been watching you train. Good for you. It's good for me.
Yeah.
And I just walk away.
Yeah.
And I threaten. I even when I call them out, I'm like, look, man, good for you, good for me rule. And if it happens to you and you cry or whine about it, I'm going to look at you and say, you were playing the game, and I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to give you any kind of compassion. There's not going to be no sympathy for you. I'm going to look at you and turn my back.
Especially when it's already been addressed. Yep.
Yeah. Because that's a lesson they have to learn.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So, what you working on?
The nakadaka. The timing of it all, the drive of it, trying not to do the technique through my shoulders, but keeping my shoulders down and still having an explosive, dynamic feel to it. I feel like we spend so much time in the linear actions of like reverse punch, jab, step and punch, stuff like that, that when we come into these, haito, shuto, nakadaka, where you have these curvatures to your trajectory, it changes a lot of things. And I just want to get it better. I want it to be as consistent as my reverse punch, and as effective and as mechanically correct, well timed, so that I'm not hurting myself.
Right.
Because everybody goes, "Oh, it feels odd or awkward." Well, generally, when you say that, it's because you're doing it wrong and you're putting some kind of strain on a joint that shouldn't be. And I believe there's a correct way to do things and there's an incorrect way to do it, and that's what I'm working on right now. It's just that idea, because that is so hard to get like crisp and clean like a reverse punch.
Yeah. The downward nakadaka thing.
Doink. And the trajectory's kind of weird, the timing's kind of weird, and it's not a technique that's practiced a lot in basics. It's not a basic technique. So I feel like that's what I'm doing.
Sweet.
What you working on?
Kind of the same stuff. I did that. I kind of did some hip rotation drill type stuff, trying to calibrate those movements, trying to calibrate, rotating your hips and driving a linear technique, rotating your hips and driving more angular, circular techniques. Didn't train as much probably since the last time we recorded a podcast, so still kind of walked through those things. Yesterday, went through Chinte again, and actually when we were going through Meikyo in the black belt class, just working on trying to do better about contracting the glutes during the right times to control my hip movement, because I definitely still have the wobbles. Like, that's super difficult to control.
Yeah.
So kind of just general stuff right now. There wasn't really anything specific over the past few weeks that I focused on, just trying to recalibrate my brain.
Yeah, I think I'm to the point where I'm going to move on to Meikyo. Not because I have Chinte down, but because it's like, I'm getting to the point where I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, we kind of plateaued on that kata.
We plateaued on it. I think when we plateau on a kata, it's because the underlying theme or issue that we're working on is the issue we have overall.
Everywhere.
Overall in our karate. You know what I mean? And there's only so many subtleties of the techniques or subtleties of the kata that you could go over and over with until it becomes this thing where you're just like, your timing's off.
Yeah, and you're not getting it by doing this thing over and over again. So,
right, so you got to move on. Even though I will say this, I feel like our Chinte is pretty strong. Like, it's a high standard. I feel like it is compared to the people I watch and compare ourselves like that. I feel like it's not like we're horrible at it. It's just that it's not where our karate's not where we want it to be. So then Chinte is not where we want it to be. You know what I mean?
That.
That's kind of where I feel like we're at.
Plus the katas, that kata's really strange.
It's not really. It's strange because it uses so many different weird, like uncommon techniques. But
even the angles of your arms to your body between the nakadaka and the double down block halfway behind you thing, the angles are so weird. I don't give a crap where it's repeated. It's so weird. Okay.
There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. So I kind of understand what you're saying. I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying that it's more common than not, and that's one of those things. I think, creating dynamic movement in unusual situations is where we're at right now in our karate.
Awesome.
So
All right.
hopefully next time we have a podcast, we'll be talking about Mikyo and how much we suck at it.
I don't know that I'm doing it, but you can have fun with it.
Oh, you're going to stick with Chinte?
I don't know what I'm doing, okay? I'm a free spirit. I just go where the wind takes me. No, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Okay, it's been real.
It's been real.
Bye.
Bye.